Hi, this is Dr. Stephanie Wautier, and I'm the host of Conversations with a Chiropractor. I believe healing often begins with connection, and that's really what this podcast is about. These are real conversations about health, healing, life, and the stories that shape us. Some guests come from the wellness world, some come from the community, and some simply bring a life experience worth sharing. My hope is that each conversation invites you to listen, learn, reflect, and maybe see your own life or healing in a new way. Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy this conversation with a chiropractor. Today on Conversations with a Chiropractor, I am joined by Zolal Habibi. She is an Iranian human rights activist and a prominent voice for justice, democracy, and women's rights in Iran. She serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, where she advocates globally for a secular, democratic republic in Iran. With over 2 decades of dedicated activism, she has become a fierce advocate on behalf of the voiceless inside Iran, regularly appearing in international forums, human rights conferences, and live broadcasts across major media platforms. It is such an honor to have Zolal here on my podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for being
Thank you very
with us.
much for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And please allow me to greet those who are tuning in to the podcast today. It is a pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to allow me to echo the voice of the people of Iran in these critical times.
Yes. So Iran has had just a horrific, tumultuous political situation for so long, and your father was actually massacred in the streets. Is that correct?
Yes, my father was killed by the regime in the summer of 1988. And at that time, actually, that summer was a turning point in our history, really. It's one of the greatest massacres that was carried out since World War II. 30,000 political prisoners were executed in 5-6 weeks. And it was actually simultaneous with Iran agreeing to a ceasefire with Iraq at the time after the 8-year war. So there's a lot of parallels to the situation today, what happened in 1988. And that is the historic reference there.
How old were you
I
in
was 7 years old
1988?
at that time.
7 years old. So your family chose to stay in Iran and live there?
Actually,
after
I
this
have
happened?
never been to Iran. My parents came to the US before the revolution as a student, and my father he was a writer and a prominent human rights activist, and so he was actively working in the 1980s to shed light on the human rights situation in Iran and what was happening on the ground there. So the regime had a great spite against him, and that is why he was eventually eliminated by the regime. Unfortunately, my father wasn't the only one. There were others who, like for instance, Dr. Rajavi, he was at the beginning, right after the revolution, he was the UN representative of Iran. And he was from the first months, he distanced himself from the regime and said he wants to have no part in it. And he was actually the voice of human rights on Iran, and he was actually assassinated in 1990, just about like a mile and a half away from the UN building. Or Dr. Mohammad Hossein Naqvi, who was he was the representative of the NCRI in Italy, and he was also assassinated by the regime. So unfortunately, the Iranian regime has carried out over 500 terrorist attacks against dissidents throughout these years abroad, outside of Iran's borders.
Subscribe for more. Full episodes released Wednesdays. I'm thrilled to share a product I trust and my patients love, Lemon Grove Oil. It's created by Dr. Jerry Del Canton, formulated to be absorbed super quickly, meaning neck pain, back pain, and arthritis relief come quickly. It's all natural with no sulfites, no parabens, and it's naturally derived, no preservatives. Something that's so important to us these days. If you want to feel better fast, give it a try. You won't be sorry. Visit lemongroveoil.com and use code Dr. Stephanie for 10% off. Wow. So it has become your life's mission. And really, truly, you want just a democracy. You want for the Iranian people to be able to have a fair election and to have people that they are voting for in office. Tell our listeners who may or may not know a little bit about how would you describe the regime? The regime is like a group of people who've overtaken the country, who basically do what they want, take what money they want. And it sort of seems to me like the entire population of Iran is under, unfortunately, their thumb, right? Even to have basic needs met and survival. And can you tell us a little bit about even when your dad went back, and then when you talk about the parallels, what is life in Iran like for the people?
I think it's really important to understand that the people of Iran have been fighting for freedom in Iran for 120 years. In a few days, it'll be 4th of July, and it's going to be 250 years. But imagine there's another country that has been fighting half of that for just a democracy in their country. But I think what is most important is that they haven't given in and they haven't given up, and they're continuing. Unfortunately, the people of Iran, they had a revolution that they were able to put an end to monarchy in Iran, which was a very important step. But unfortunately, that revolution was hijacked by Khomeini. The reality is that those who had created the revolution had created the revolution for democracy and for freedom. But unfortunately, those who had paid the price for this revolution, they were in the prisons of the Shah till the last minute. And so during that time, Khomeini filled that vacuum. And in fact, Khomeini was in exile in Iraq for 20 years. And then 6 months before the revolution, he was brought to Paris, to France. And then there was a conference in Guadeloupe in France where Western powers met with Khomeini and they made concessions with him for him to take over power. Why? Because it was a Cold War era, and they just felt like, well, you know what, USSR has a very huge common border with Iran. Iran has always played a very important geopolitical role. It's also a country rich in natural resources. So, what kind of guarantees do we have that they won't become a USSR ally, especially because I guess the Western powers knew that, their own history in Iran and what they had done. The 1953 coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh was the only democratic government that we had in the last century in Iran for 2 years. And, so they had that background. And so they made a concession with Khomeini. They figured he is a fundamentalist. So he is opposed to communism. So that was a plus for them. And so he had also made promises that he never kept. From day one that he came into power, he was after complete power. And we saw soon after, a few months later, the U.S. hostage taking, and then the start of the Iran-Iraq war and whatnot. So, and also, the killing of the people of Iran, which started practically immediately. The first protest against Khomeini was by the women of Iran, who opposed the compulsory veil a few months after the revolution, actually, the first International Women's Day. And it is noteworthy to state that what's interesting is that the women who came to the protest, it wasn't just women who didn't wear a scarf. It was women who actually did wear the scarf too, who came to protect them and said, look, there should be no force in veiling. You have no right to dictate to a woman what to wear and what not to wear. Both, if you force it on them and if you force them to remove it, it's both, force. And you have no right to be entering a woman's personal, space. And this is, you have no jurisdictions over this issue. But Khomeini knew what he was doing, because he knew that if he has control over half of society, automatically you have control over all of society, especially when you're able to enter the most personal aspect of people's lives. Unfortunately, since June 20th, 1981, the mass killings in Iran have begun. June 20th, 1981, there was a peaceful protest of over 500,000 people in Tehran, and it was a spontaneous protest, and it was met with fire. Khomeini went on the radio waves and said, open fire at will and, kill, maim, with that aim, go into the streets. And unfortunately, since that day, the mass executions began in Iran. at times I know people who were teenagers at the time who were in prison for, passing out a pamphlet or things of that nature in 1981. And they said they would count every night just in the prison that they were in 300, 400 executions being carried out. And so the reign of terror began.
Wow.
And Khomeini wanted to send a message. He wanted to show that he will show no mercy to anyone when it comes to keeping his grip on power. And that is what we have seen consistently for 47 years now. They had children as young as 13 years old executed. I don't know how much a 13-year-old knows about politics to be executed based on that, but that is the reality of Iran. Or pregnant women, mothers, elderly mothers in their 70s and their 80s who've been executed. But that's the message that the regime wanted to send. And in fact, we have actually copies of newspapers that the regime has printed, like the pictures of teenage girls, and they've stated, like the title says, "Would the parents of these children come and identify their bodies, because we don't even know their names and they've been executed." And so that is how they spread fear in society for years. And I think the fact that in face of all of this, a organized resistance came about and people never gave in, and they just started standing, and they've never stopped. I think that is unprecedented at least in modern history. And that is what we take pride in. And the fact that we have never given into this theocracy. Unfortunately, just to connect it to today, since the war that began on February 28th, right on the week that the ceasefire was signed, so after 40 days of war, ceasefire was signed, political executions began to be rampant in Iran. And in the past, since that day till today, over 30 political prisoners have been executed, aside from many others who've been executed. And since the beginning of the year, aside from all of those who were killed in the streets, because in January we had the uprisings and thousands of people were killed in the streets in Iran. But aside from that, actual executions that have been carried out, over 850 people have been executed in Iran in the past few months. And Iran is the number one country in executions per capita. But we are also faced with, it's on one hand, it's the brutal suppression. And, the regime literally makes life unbearable for the people of Iran. Just actually this week, we saw increase in the price of bread. Overnight, it doubled in a economy that the people of Iran came to the streets in January because of the economic situation and the economic crisis. So literally people don't have the means to make ends meet right now. And Iran is a rich country in natural resources, but unfortunately the people of Iran have never actually benefited from that. It has always been used by the tyrants to line their own pockets, or now you see how the regime is using it for the export of terrorism and fundamentalism and warmongering and whatnot. So that has unfortunately been the situation in Iran. But on the other hand, one of the things that really is painful for the people of Iran, and we have suffered a great deal from it, is the policy of appeasement. A lot of people automatically think, okay, well, either you need to negotiate with this regime and come to some kind of a terms with it, or you have to be in war with it. But the reality is, like, from 22 years ago, Mrs. Rajavi, who's the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, she has reiterated this time and time and again that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement, because policy of appeasement will eventually lead to a war. This isn't just the experience with Iran that we're seeing right now, how it's played out, but also, like, for instance, if you go back World War II, what happened? The world appeased Hitler to the extent that it was already too late, right? So we've been warning about that for like over 2 decades. But she's stated that there is a third option. It's supporting the people of Iran to bring about change, because the difference is that in Iran, we actually have an organized resistance movement. We actually have people who are willing to dedicate their lives to bring about that change. 120,000 people have been executed in Iran in the last 47 years for supporting this movement. So a generation or a population that is willing to pay that kind of a price, they're willing to see it through. And I think that is something that more and more people are starting to realize today after everything that we've experienced so far in 2026. But unfortunately, we're still seeing the effects of the policy of appeasement. I like to share something with you. Just last week on June 20th, there was a rally that was supposed to be held in Paris against the wave of executions in Iran. And the Iranian diaspora and the supporters of the National Council of Resistance of Iran had been planning this for about 2 months. They were expecting about 100,000 people to be in attendance. And less than 48 hours before the program, they received an email stating that the police had, or the French government had banned the demonstration. They took this to court because they're like, you can't just do that. But unfortunately, because they waited till the last minute, even though everything was finalized with the local police, with the local government, they had gone through the final, maneuvers and everything just hours before. But because they had let them know about like at 8 o'clock at night where you couldn't do anything, so their hands were tied. So by the time they were able to file the complaint with the court, it was morning, and then I think the court met about like 6 p.m. And they said, well, we'll give our verdict tomorrow morning, which was the morning of the event. And unfortunately, it became clear in court that the reason that this ban was placed was because of the threats by the regime. There were 4 phone conversations between the foreign minister of France and the foreign minister of Iran in the days leading to this event. And the day that the cancellation came, there was a 45-minute phone call, which is clear that this was, the issue that Iran was pushing for. But they said due to threats, security threats from the regime, but also threats made by remnants of the monarchy in the Pahlavi dynasty or whatever, supporters of Reza Pahlavi. And to us, the fact that dictators, at the end of the day, they use the same methods and mechanisms, that they can't even bear a rally that is against executions in Iran, thousands of miles away from Iran. I think that it just showed what they fear the most. They fear their people. They fear the organized resistance. And actually, I think that they actually gave the address of the alternative to this regime and what the solution is. It did get a lot of media coverage internationally, but that day I saw in Paris, mothers who've lost their children, who were there to honor their children that day. And then they were met with, riot police and whatnot, or children who had lost their parents, children, people like myself who have lost our parents, and they were there to try to prevent another generation from going through what we had. And one of them, she was just like screaming. I have a video of her. She was just like screaming at the top of her lungs, saying that, look, we are the victims of the Iranian regime. My father was executed by this regime. I'm here to prevent that. And now I'm being met with police brutality. What is this? Why are you using pepper spray against us? Why? I mean, first of all, you guys didn't. You had 2 months time to cancel. You didn't. You did it at the last minute. And that was when we were already, because based on numbers that we have, over 837 buses had arrived in Paris when that statement was given. The final cancellation, because the court verdict came at like 9:30 in the morning. People were already on the site grounds at that time. And so those scenes really, I think they shook a lot of people, because it did get, as I said, a lot of international attention. But the fact that we allow dictators to manipulate our freedoms or our democracies this way, I think that is something that should be of concern to anyone, that how they're able to, extend their terror and their censorship and their, brutality.
Especially when they can do it in another country, hundreds of miles away. It's mind-boggling to me that the regime can sustain this much power, right? And many people might see that the foreign intervention can help, but obviously, like, there's been no success in 120 years with foreign countries coming to quote unquote help Iran, right? I mean, you can't even have a peaceful protest in France without it being shut down because of the regime. What do you think is the solution? How can the regime be taken over?
To see the full part of the cup too, just to give you explanation on that. Yes, the people of Iran have been fighting for their freedoms for 120 years. They have had three successful revolutions, but unfortunately each time, because of foreign intervention, it was not successful. It didn't fully bloom, I guess you could say. Like, for instance, we had the 1906 constitutional revolution, which turned the monarchy from a complete monarchy to a constitutional monarchy to try to create some kind of, the parliament and things of that nature. But unfortunately, then there was the coup d'etat by the British, who brought in Reza Khan, the father of the previous Shah. And so that changed things. And then he was taken into, once he wasn't serving their purposes anymore, he was sent into exile, especially because he was aligning himself more with Hitler during World War II and things of that nature, and it's embarrassment. But actually the daughter of Reza Pahlavi, actually on her Facebook, actually has a picture of a note written by Hitler for her grandfather. And I'm like, is that something to be proud of? I'm not really sure about that, or great grandfather or whatever. But that was unfortunately the situation there. So after he was taken out, his son replaced him, who is known as the Shah, I guess, in the West. Muhammad Reza Pahlavi. In the first years, he really didn't have that much power, and he knew that he had to keep himself in check because of the experience with his father. And so at that time, people were able to take up and continue that path that they had started from the 1906 constitutional revolution. They said, look, the prime minister has to be elected. Things need, we need to have checks and balances in place. Try to turn, even if it's monarchy, let's try to turn it to some kind of a democratic monarchy or whatnot. And then that's how Prime Minister Dr. Mossadegh came into power. And what did he do? He nationalized Iran's oil. Till that point, Iran or Iranians only received 6% of the oil revenues of Iran. The rest of it went to the US and the UK at that time, British Petroleum. And so with this nationalizing Iran's oil, that was a major blow to the Western powers, but it was also, a major victory for the people of Iran in the road to independence and to becoming, a sovereign state, and pushing out, all of that foreign intervention in their country. And because Iran plays an important geopolitical role, it had its ripple effect in other countries, and everyone was talking about let's So that's why there was a coup d'etat by the MI6 and the CIA against Dr. Mossadegh, and he was taken out after 2 years. And the Shah was reinstated. And since that day, the Shah ruled with the iron fist. He eliminated all parties were banned. He said, Iran, we only have one party. If you don't like it, leave the country or you'll be arrested. And he called himself the shadow of God on earth. So he was the chosen one. And he had the Savak, who, killed and maimed people. And, people really were not even able to speak publicly. I mean, people were arrested and imprisoned and tortured for writing a poem or an article, or for singing a song. Famous singers or poets were even arrested, and some of them were killed at that time. And, then President Carter came into power, and he realized that, the situation in Iran, it's like a powder keg waiting to explode when he saw the situation. And he was like, look, you need to calm down, and you need to stop execution and torture, because this is not going to lead to somewhere positive. But what President Carter didn't realize, that it was already too late, because the minute the Shah stopped execution and torture, people were so fed up. They were like, no, we want it out. We want an end to monarchy in our country. We want a independent democratic government. And so they had a revolution. And, back then, also thousands were killed in the streets in the protests. But they were able to succeed, and they were overthrew the Shah. But unfortunately, as I said, Khomeini hijacked the revolution. So it's been a, back and forth battle, and it is still continuing to this day. I think the world saw in January that the people of Iran came to the streets with such bravery, but they were met with, fire. The regime has also used the fact that, it has used technology to its benefit too. With the internet blackout, they were able to have open arms to mass kill the people. Um, I think the world saw like the images of the black body bags and the parents who were mourning their children, but they were also trying to be strong and celebrate the lives of their children and to say that we're going to continue this. Because I think if you look in the last 10 years, we've had like 4 major uprisings in Iran and in over a decade. And each time the people come to the streets with such bravery, and then they're met with bullets. And people this time realize, look, if they're able to push us back into our homes, then we have to wait till the next spark, and then the cycle is never ending. We need to stand our ground, and we need to continue till the overthrow of the regime. We can't be pushed back in our homes. And that was the direction that they were going in. But when the war started, I mean, with bombs over your head, you're not going to be able to come to the streets. But the regime has always also used that as a pretext to increase its suppression. There is martial law in Iran right now since practically the past 6 months. We've had martial law in Iran. There are checkpoints now since since March all over the place. Like they say, if you want to, drive like a 30-minute distance, you'll have to go through at least 2 checkpoints. And then the checkpoints, they're not just checking your car or your ID. They actually take your phone, and they check your phone. First of all, especially because there was an 80-day internet blackout during the war, they would check and see like when is the last time certain apps connected in your phone. If they were connected, they're like, you went around the internet blackout, so it's not clear, you might, and then they will have people arrested on charges of you were spying or you were doing this or that, espionage. And if you didn't have your phone with you, that was also a red flag for them. They're like, oh, so what are you doing? But what was the regime really afraid of? They were afraid of what they were seeing. They were seeing people mobilizing on the ground. So that's why they had the internet blackout and communication blackout. You couldn't send text within the country even. No one could make calls to Iran. Only people could make calls from landlines to outside of Iran. And those landlines were completely controlled. So that was the situation in Iran. And right now, I mean, you could imagine if the situation was unbearable before the start of the war, just imagine the devastation of a war being added to that. And so life is really unbearable right now in Iran. But what we are seeing is just in this past week, we are seeing protests again. We are seeing people coming to the streets again under different, I guess, I don't want to say excuses, but under different pretexts, be it for the price of, bread, or be it because of electricity outages that they're having, or agricultural. One of the issues right now is that water has been cut off from the agricultural sector, and how are they supposed to continue? And that is why the price of bread has also increased like 20 within overnight, doubling. So that is the situation people are living under, and it's truly unbearable. And you have to understand this: Iran is a country with 90 million population, which mostly are under the age of 30. So it's a very young population that see no future whatsoever in the current situation. And they're just like, you know what? We have nothing to lose. And that is something that adds to, I guess, maybe the fact that people are willing to take such risks, because especially the Gen Z of Iran, I think they're seeing their parents' generation. They're seeing that, their grandparents tried to protect their children because they experienced the 8-year war with Iraq, and the fact that children were taken to open minefields. 450,000 children were taken to minefields. They would be given like these plastic gold keys, and they would tell these children, oh, this is the key to heaven. So we're going to wrap you up in a blanket and we're going to roll you open on a minefield, and then you'll go to heaven. And the regime did that with its future. I mean, just imagine a government that's willing to do that with the future of your country, and Iran did that. And so those parents, that generation, they were like very protective of their children just to keep them safe. And now their grandchildren are like, you know what? Because you tried to keep your children so safe, nothing has changed. No one's going to give us freedom in a silver platter. We have to pay the price for that, and allow us now to do that, because nothing's going to change otherwise. Because unfortunately, there are governments who have interests in Iran because of oil deals or, natural resources and everything. And then there are countries who fear Iran because of Iran being the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. And also publicly have, their policy has been since, I guess, 8-9 years now. Hostage diplomacy. That is one of the issues, like for instance, with France, that is what we're dealing with. Like in the past decade, if you look, constantly the Iranian regime takes French, citizens who travel to Iran as hostage and then uses them as bargaining chips to get whatever they want in regards to the Iranian resistance, because the base of the National Council of Resistance of Iran is in France. And so unfortunately we have been the bargaining chip used at the negotiation table, not only by France, but unfortunately by over a dozen countries. And the people of Iran have paid that price gravely over the decades. But now they want to put an end to it. And that is what we're seeing in Iran.
Zolal, we didn't even touch so much on the horrific tragedies that are happening like every single day. I'm a mother and I'm so sensitively empathetic, and I literally can't fathom the day-to-day existence under this regime. And I think it's just so admirable that the NCRI is just working tirelessly, and that you're working so hard not to lose hope, right? That you're trying to give the young people of Iran hope, right? That they could have a democracy, that they could have a different kind of a living situation under perhaps, something other than the regime. What would you tell my listeners who perhaps are, white Americans, or what would you tell us? What can we do? Like what can we do today that would help?
There's
somehow?
A lot that we can do no matter where we are. I think first and foremost, raising awareness, because I think that is key to bringing about change anywhere on any issue. As you said, keeping up the hope is really important. I think keeping up the hope in people's hearts in Iran has always been key for us, but also keeping the flame of resistance alive. But I think that for those who are abroad, no matter which country they're in, but first of all, try to learn more about the subject. Like, for instance, the fact that, look, there is a third option on Iran. Raise this with your lawmakers, raise it with your local media outlets, letters to the editors, anything, podcasts everywhere. Just try to share that message. Look, there's a third option on Iran. We're not stuck between a war or appeasement, supporting the people of Iran to create change themselves. The people of Iran are not asking for troops on the ground. They're not asking for financial support. They're not asking for any of that. They're just asking, please be neutral or just stop backing the regime and using us as bargaining chips. So they're not asking for anything really. They're just asking for, recognizing their right to resist in face of a tyrannical regime, recognizing, the crimes perpetrated by this regime and not turning a blind eye on it. Those are key, and using those mechanisms internationally to limit the hands of the regime. On the other hand, it's really important to understand that there is a bright future ahead, because I think that for many, they're like, what comes next? That was the question that was being asked, I think, in March and April by many in the US too. Like, what comes next if this regime falls or whatnot? Well, that too, there's a third option. We're not stuck choosing between the current regime or going backwards in history and going back to a monarchy. That's not what the people of Iran want. They want to move forward to a, as I said, secular democratic republic. People's sovereignty. After all of these years of fighting for freedom, they want to be able to actually create that democracy, that have separation of religion and state, have a independent judiciary, have respect for the autonomy of Iran's different ethnicities, gender equality, cornerstones that create that true democracy. And unfortunately, those are outlined in the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. And many have called the 10-point plan Jeffersonian because of the things that it covers. It calls for the abolition of the death penalty in Iran and all forms of torture. Well, that's a great step forward when you look and you see that, look, 2026, Iran is the #1 country in executions per capita. 1976, it was also the #1 country in executions per capita during the Shah's time. So we want to move away from that. And in fact, when you see those who have been the main victims of execution under both dictatorships are the ones who are saying, no death penalty. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what. We need to put an end to this cycle. No one has a right to take someone else's life. I think that speaks volumes. The fact that we call for, the sovereignty of people. The ballot box is the final criterion, not some hereditary, lineage or having a supreme leader or whatnot. There needs to be separation of religion and state. There needs to be, basic freedoms need to be guaranteed. And I think that lays out the fundaments to creating that free Iran. But also, I think what's really important is that in Iran, we actually have a resistance that has withstood the test of time. The NCRI in a few days will be celebrating 45 years since its establishment in July. It was created on July 20th, 1981. 45 years of steadfast dedication in the fact that they've always stood for whatever they said. So it's not just mere words or just words, written on a paper. It is actually in practice. When they say, like, we believe in women's empowerment, well, you see the fact that, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran for the interim government is actually a woman, or 52% of the parliament in exile are women. The entire leadership council of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran are women. I think, or like all of their secretary generals since 1989 till today have been women. So, you see that contrast between the current regime, which is a misogynist regime, and the resistance. And I think that, these are all very important cornerstones for this movement. And I think that is what will guarantee that we're on the right path. Because first of all, people who've dedicated decades of their lives to this fight, if they were in it for power or if they were in it to line their own pockets, there were easier ways to do that. This was not the path because, everyone who is in this movement has done so with great personal sacrifice, and self-sacrifice has been, I guess, the key element of this movement. So that is why the people of Iran feel like they can trust this movement. Like, for instance, when I speak of Mrs. Rajavi, we had a women's conference actually in February, and there was a parliamentarian from Italy. She was speaking and she said, look, and this was in a workshop. Mrs. Rajavi was not there. It was in a workshop. And she said, I look at this woman and the fact that she joined this movement when she was 19, and she was like a elite student at a Shaif university at that time, which was like the equivalent to MIT in Iran. She became an activist since then. And it's been over 50 years that every single day of her life has been dedicated to this cause. And it's one thing to be a member of an organization. It's another when people are looking at you as a solution. And she's had that responsibility on her shoulders for 41 years now. That people look at her.
Wow.
And their hope is in her, entrusted in her. And she has literally given every waking hour of her life to this cause. So that kind of dedication is something that we feel like we can trust. And what she has done is that she wasn't just like a superstar woman that, yes, I am the one who has the strength to be able to do this. She's created a whole line of, or generation of capable female leaders. And she has instilled in everyone that you have the strength to do anything. She has broken so many glass ceilings and allowed, and she has presented to everyone that, look, I am not an exception to the rule. Everyone has this power. All it takes is, making that choice and putting your mind to it and then paying the price for it step by step. And it's not like you have to take giant leaps. It's like little steps, tiny steps every single day, constantly, until you reach that goal. And there's nothing that you can't do. And so I think that is what has inspired the younger generation in Iran to continue this path and to not give in and not to give up, even when the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? So, even when the situation is hard, we have a saying in Farsi that we say it's always darkest before dawn. So yes, we are going through the darkest phase.
Yeah.
But, I think that dawn is inevitable at the end of the day. And we hope to be able to see that soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we all hope that for you and Iran as well. Zolal, when we think about, media and the information that we're receiving, do you have, would you say that you have resources or sources that you could tell our listeners to refer to get the real information about what's happening, or to follow along with the NCRI and the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, you can visit the website of the NCRI. It's ncr-iran.org, or you could visit Maryam Rajavi for change.com or maryam-rajavi.com. And also, if you're for those who are in the US, you could reach out to oiac.org. It's the Organization of Iranian American Communities. They have chapters across over 40 states in the US. So you're probably covered there. And they do have a lot of activities both on Capitol Hill or locally. And so they would greatly appreciate any support and solidarity. They hold a lot of different events and exhibits, trying to raise awareness campaigns and whatnot. So you can reach out to them. And for those who are like in Canada or anywhere in Europe or anywhere else, they could reach out to iranfreedom.org and they'll put you in contact with local chapters.
Well, Zolal, this has been such an eye-opening and heart-wrenching time with you. I love that you can still smile and that you can still have hope, and that you do have this amazing leader that is basically such a brilliant example for young women everywhere. It has been such an honor to talk to you today, and I know that we can't really ever understand the grief and the horrific day-to-day trials, but we can lend our hand in friendship and say, we stand with you in hope. We walk with you for a better tomorrow for Iran. And boy, it's been just such an honor and a pleasure to have you on this podcast.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope that soon we will be able to share better news with everyone, and hopefully we could have you, in a free Iran and cover that we have been able to succeed.
We would all love to hear that, Zolal. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, like, or subscribe? You can find me on social media at wautierwellness.com, Dr. Stephanie Wautier on Instagram, or Wautier Wellness Chiropractic and Massage on Facebook. And I'm so curious where your next conversation will take you.
Subscribe for more. Full episodes released Wednesdays.
I'm thrilled to share a product I trust and my patients love, Lemon Grove Oil. It's created by Dr. Jerry Del Canton, formulated to be absorbed super quickly, meaning neck pain, back pain, and arthritis relief come quickly. It's all natural with no sulfites, no parabens, and it's naturally derived, no preservatives. Something that's so important to us these days. If you want to feel better fast, give it a try. You won't be sorry. Visit lemongroveoil.com and use code Dr. Stephanie for 10% off.